wanted to use
Billy Short.
University of Arizona philosophy professor Elizabeth Brake, for example, supports what she calls minimal marriage, in which, and I quote her, individuals can have legal marital relationships with more than one person at the same time, reciprocally or asymmetrically, themselves determining the sex and number of the parties, the type of relationship involved, and which rights and responsibilities to exchange with each. Elizabeth Brake is not some crank. She's a highly respected professor of philosophy. The article from which I quoted appears in the most prominent journal of moral and political philosophy, the journal Ethics. That is now mainstream. Judith Stacy, a prominent New York University professor who is in no way regarded as a fringe figure, in testifying before Congress against the Defense of Marriage Act, and if they thought she was a fringe figure, they certainly wouldn't have put her up as their witness before Congress in that controversial legislation. Professor Stacy expressed hope that the redefinition of marriage would give marriage, quote, varied, creative, and adaptive contours, leading some to question the dyadic, that means two, limitations of Western marriage and seek small group marriages, unquote. In a statement called Beyond Same-Sex Marriage, more than 300 LGBT and allied scholars and advocates, as they identified themselves, including such prominent and influential figures as Gloria Steinem, recently given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama, Barbara Ehrenreich, the law professor Kenji Yoshino, and so forth, calls for legally recognizing as marriages or the equivalent sexual relationships involving more than two partners. We're not talking here only about polygamy, which is, of course, well known in history and across cultures. We're talking about 3 or 4 or 5 people being married as a group, in a sexual partnership as a group. In polygamy, ordinarily polygyny, one man has separate marriages with 2 or more wives. So Henry's married to Sally, Henry is separately married to Jill, Henry is separately married to Henrietta. But Henrietta and Jill and Sally are not in a marriage with each other together. What these scholars and advocates are talking about are marriages in which the group is in a sexual partnership as a group, demanding the same marriage equality as everybody else. Nor are such group marriages, so-called, unheard of. Newsweek reports that there are more than 500,000 polyamorous households in the United States alone. In Brazil, a public notary has recognized a trio of people as a civil union. Mexico City has considered expressly temporary marriage licenses. So instead of pledging for better or worse, and richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, through death do we part, it's a pledge for 5 years renewable. Or in the old language of the 60s, a pledge to stay together for as long as love lasts. The Toronto, Canada District School Board treats polyamorous sexual partnerships as among the many valid forms of family structure in its curricular materials in the state schools. And what about the connection to family life? Writer E.J. Graff celebrates the fact that recognizing same-sex unions would change the institution's message, as she calls it, so that it would, and I quote, ever after stand for sexual choice, for cutting the link between sex and diapers, unquote. Enacting same-sex marriage, she says, quote, does more than just fit, it announces that marriage has changed shape, unquote. Now that's what I call coming out of the closet, because as I said at the beginning of my remarks, we were told at the beginning, we don't want to change marriage. We just want to make more people eligible to participate in it. That was then. This is now. What about sexual exclusivity? Andrew Sullivan, a self-styled proponent of the, quote, conservative, unquote, case for same-sex marriage, has gone so far as to extol, and I quote him, the spirituality of anonymous sex. I had to look up what anonymous sex means. Now, I realize I'm a boy from West Virginia, I'm from the hills, I'm not in the avant-garde, but that means, for those of you who are like me, don't know what that means until someone explains it or you look it up, it means having sex with complete strangers where you don't even bother to exchange names. And Sullivan, the conservative advocate of same-sex marriage, tells us that those kinds of fleeting sexual couplings can have spiritual value. And he welcomes the fact that the, quote, openness, as he says, unquote, of same-sex unions might erode sexual exclusivity among those in opposite-sex marriages. So to liven things up for the dull old husbands and wives who haven't yet got the memorandum about what fun you can have by opening your relationship up to others.